Hey you guys, it's me, B. Riley. Okay, so I've had a couple days to kind of look at the SG with the pickguard off and test some other pickguards against it and kind of look at spacing and everything like that. And I think I've got this a little bit more figured out now. Admittedly, last time I was coming at it with some lacking data, so we're gonna go ahead and get into this. But I am gonna say this right now, this is definitely not the guitar that I thought I was buying when I bought it. As it turns out, I'm actually kind of glad. You know, when I thought I was getting a 67 with a large guard from the factory, I was actually buying it for the intended purpose of using it as a custom project for somebody who I was talking to about building up something that was like really intentional, purpose-built for them. Unfortunately, this guitar does not check all those boxes. The particular routing and everything like that means that unfortunately we wouldn't be able to have the pickup placement where they want it because the pickups are not where they should be, like we were saying in the last video. Anyway, we're gonna go into it, but what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna point camera down and we are going to start going through the details of this. So let's get to it. Okay, so we've got the pick guard off. We've taken off the bridge, we've taken off the tailpiece. So we've got a good, clear view over everything that's going on here. Now, like I was saying earlier in the video, I had anticipated getting a 67 large guard that was going to be used for somebody else. So when it showed up and the route was not the same as I had seen set up in a photograph, it turned out that there was a photograph that was mistakenly sent. It wasn't the right photograph. But here's the thing. Now that I've had like 2 days to really sit back and think about this, whoever did the custom work on this, they probably did it at the same time that they did the headstock repair. It's probably the same time that the brass nut was installed. They all seem to kind of carry the same aesthetic of that early 70s, late 60s customization trends that you have with brass nut and everything like that. The two-pneumatic bridge also is an interesting addition because it's very utilitarian. See, that's the thing about all the mods on this guitar. You can't really pick on them too much because they all do serve a function. The brass nut has a very interesting feature in which the actual string recesses are angled and contoured slightly to provide a more gradual, less stressful departure and trajectory for the string, which is pretty awesome, actually. Then we go inboard and we go to the pickup modification. Now, if this were a 67 single pickup, it would indeed have a recess here. But the only problem with this recess is that it's not conducive with the 67. The 67 should have a relief recess right here where your cables run through. This is a recess for a dog ear because it does not have the provision for that cable recess right there. So that's not consistent with it being a 67 because no 67 would have had dog ears. When they repositioned the pickups, when they converted this from a 1 pickup to a 2 pickup, they had a choice because the pickups can't be right up on top of each other. You would lack tonal variation. But whoever did the modifications back then wanted to stay away from this block really, really bad because they put the pickup inboard and then, because that would have placed these 2 pickups right next to each other, then plugged the original pickup recess, moved the pickup back, rerouted a new recess that was right up against the actual two-pneumatic bridge. That type of modification, the cleanliness of the route, the tidy nature of the plug. I'm going to ignore this because I think that this was done at a different period of time. But if we're just focusing on this, this looks a lot like the work of a luthier who was doing work on jazz boxes, semi-hollows, and acoustics. But we can ascertain that at this point, this guitar was at no point in 1967. We have a 64/65 style neck joint. We have a long intrusion here instead of the short, tenon style intrusion. Now, if we are looking at the bridge, if we do have to get down to the less pleasant aspects of things, some of the wiring in here is a bit suspect. You can see here that they've just wrapped a cheap piece of exposed, whatever the hell that is, around both posts. I don't know why they would do that since the bridge would be conductive. Anyway, it looks like some sort of paste-based epoxy wood filler. Seems to be holding up. I'm not going to mess with that. I'm going to be honest with you, and here's the reason why. Since the pickup's been moved backward, to reinstall the actual lightning bar would mean re-drilling these out, pounding back in the posts, and there's not enough material right here right now to be able to use that. You know, that type of lightning bar where it's actually supporting also strings pulling this way. There's just not enough meat and potatoes there, so we're going to leave that alone. Also, another reason I'm not going to change this is that, to be frank, this guitar, even in disrepair, was playing so wonderfully that I really don't want to mess with anything that's tonally contributing to that. We want to update it, we want to refresh it, we want to fix a lot of stuff that isn't working right and make some adjustments on some things that are kind of working right, but we don't want to start using time replacing things that are working completely fine and can just be fixed with cleanup and a bit of paint and some proper wiring. Right back here we see our 3 screw holes that have been very, very poorly filled. They are just ahead of the 2 screw holes that actually come on this full-length tailpiece. The only problem is this. Both of these screw holes are not in the right spot. You can see now clearly that the newer bridge that they have been using, this chrome late 60s unit instead of the nickel-plated early 60s unit that they were using, is not even remotely lined up. When you've got the tailpiece off, you can see that these screws are pointing downward and away from the strap button. They should be centered to that. And also that you see you've got a screw right here, you know, right there, right next door. And over here you've got a considerable amount of distance, the whole tailpiece being mounted down and away. I suspect that whoever mounted this tailpiece was not really paying attention and at some point thought, well, let's go ahead and use the 2-pneumatic bridge to align it, because that's very straight. Not realizing that the 2-pneumatic bridge was, you know, mounted on an angle. We don't know yet if we're going to go back and forth on this, and I'm curious on your guys' input because I've actually got a nickel-plated unit coming in, which is a historically accurate repro. But then I have this late 60s chrome unit with the cover and everything like that. It's got that fantastic, you know, intricate design, the zigzag logo. But I'm not too sure where to go on that. So, you know, if you guys have an opinion, put it down there in the comments. Now let's get zoomed in here and really start picking stuff apart, because there's something that I want to show you guys real quick that can really help you if you're working on an old guitar and you need to know a bit more details about it, or you're trying to figure out where it might have come from, you know, as far as its origins and its build. So let's go ahead and zoom in. Okay, so we're focusing in right here on this plug. So what we're seeing here is not, in fact, somebody who stripped the finish, but somebody who actually ground this all away, this whole big square, to try to clean up a factory route and give themselves a very easy to reproduce, more conducive mating surface between a plug and the actual original mahogany of the guitar. So you see that they've done that, and then they've ground down this edge just slightly to make sure that it meets in the middle. I can already feel that the wood is ever so slightly lower than the finished surface. Now that's going to work out for our benefit because we have to finish this and try to blend it with that. So it being a little low is going to give us a little bit more real estate to work with, and we'll be able to play with the thickness of the finish to try to match the red as close as we can before we wet sand and texturally blend. However, if we do look very, very close right here, we can see the remnants of the dog-eared pickup right there. That would be your pin down, you know, the screw hole for the actual ear. And the reason that we're seeing these distortions right here, that is where the dog ear was pressuring down, and as it was removed or replaced, you know, or taken apart or put back together, dust and debris gets underneath that plastic and it pressures down into the finish, and it leaves you with these weird recesses like pockmarks. And this pickguard's a huge clue. Because if you look at it, it's not Gibson. It's not even remotely Gibson. Maybe on an L series in the 20s and 30s, you would see this kind of material on a Gibson, but nothing from the mid-1960s. By then, they weren't even messing with nitrate at that point. They were going straight to plastic. It's almost got a porcelain feel to it. It's super dense, very heavy, completely inflexible. This is Bakelite. This is a pre-plastic that was, you know, pretty prolific back between the 1930s and the 1950s, early 1950s. If you've ever seen plastic appliances from the 50s that are brown, or from the 40s that are black or brown, that's Bakelite. And the reason is because you had to paint Bakelite. You couldn't mold it like you could with plastic. If you have a yellow telephone like I've got, that's because the plastic was yellow. With Bakelite, you had to paint over it. It was basically like a very primitive fiberglass style plastic hybrid, invented by a gentleman by the name of Robert Beck. You can see it in the edge, and if you look around the back, they used a hole saw to cut for the bridge, and when they did, it knocked a chunk out. When Bakelite cracks, it almost looks like ceramic tile on the edge when it cracks. And on the top, that's not black plastic, that's automotive paint. You could see it's almost the exact type of paint that they were using on the headstock, which is another reason why I think that this pickguard was custom made for this guitar while the repair was happening with the headstock. And it wasn't done, you know, this way because somebody said, well, I've got to have a bespoke pickguard. It was done this way because A Dollar Gets You Five says that when they were actually modifying this guitar, judging by the die line from the aniline die breaking down in the finish, they were probably using a bespoke pickguard because they couldn't get a full-size guard. If these mods were happening in 66, 67, you know, you didn't have full-size SG Specials wandering all over the earth that could be fleeced for parts. If you were out on the East Coast and you had 150 miles between you and the next major metropolitan area, you know, you couldn't get to a dealer. You know, you had mail order catalogs back then for parts. I remember that. It was dreadful. Be happy that we don't exist in that particular junction of this business. No, somebody made this pickguard because they couldn't get a full-size guard. And because John Monroe wanted a full-size guard. He wanted the big guard, he wanted the extra pickup, he wanted a big tailpiece. He had gotten the parts. He had found them at a garage sale or in a music shop. And he had them transform this SG Junior into his more modern, desirable dream guitar at the time. And when he did, he had them personalize it. And you want to know what? They did a really good job. They really did. They did a fantastic job with what they had at the time. So what's happened here is that a pickguard was on there when it was manufactured. It was on there for about 2 or 3 years in a space where it was seeing sunlight. And then after about 2 or 3 years, somebody put that full-size guard on there. And you've got different pressures. You've got a line right here and then another line right here. Just beneath where the dog ear is, right on this line, you can see a little line just kind of curving up and over like the slope of a hill as it finds its way past this screw hole right here. And it looks like they might have had a different pickup in here for a while. Maybe it looks like a humbucker, because look at that. There's another screw hole right there. So if you look at this line right here, what this is it's another pickguard line. The pickguard was resting against this edge for just a few years, and debris built up against this edge, and sediment, you know, that you couldn't clean because it's such a tight angled space, and really how often do you get out a toothbrush to clean in between your pickguard? So bits of sediment and dirt have collected on the finish right here, and over years through gravity or just pressure or time, they slowly created these tiny little marks in the finish. So you can use this to find old pickguard orientations on guitars that maybe have gone through a couple of different iterations in their life, and you're trying to figure out what they look like when they were new. But this brings a pretty big question mark into the equation. Where do we push this? Do we go back to the small guard? Do we stick with this big guy? You know, because there's a couple issues with this guard. You know, it's got this weird double wide, like a staggered setup, so you can kind of see through it. Doesn't look right. I don't think it's really doing it any favors. Super wide cut around the bridge kind of looks janky. This all needs to be tidied up. You know, we got to go over here and we got to fix this plug. We've got to paint these. We've got to put wings in here to close up these dog-eared recesses. We got some stuff to do. We got a lot of work to do, which is awesome. Because I got to be honest, man, and lady, you know, I really needed a bit of a challenge from my mind. I was just, you know, the last week or so, I didn't have any guitars coming through that needed any heavy work, and it was feeling a little singular. You know, I was feeling a little confined. I wanted something new, something to shake it up, something to break me out of my comfort zone. So we're going to have to restore this thing, and we're going to have to make it look good, and we got to get it all back in together, and we've got to keep the weird uniqueness. We've got to keep the, you know, the music note tab thing it's got something going on. We've got to find a place for that 5-cent piece on the headstock, which I found out just last night by way of my brother Joseph, who is up in Oregon, that is a 5-cent piece from the Netherlands. I'm not too sure what the significance is there. I'm curious for you guys who are a little bit more familiar with the Vietnam era, military lingo and or practice of sociability, but is there a significance there? Are we talking about maybe John Monroe wasn't 10 or 11 when he got this thing? Maybe he was 15, 16. And if he was, that thing from the Netherlands might have come back. Maybe he was on a deployment, you know. Anyway, if you have any thoughts on the matter, go ahead and chuck them down into the comments section. Thank you guys for dealing with the 2-video thing. Admittedly, my software is a bit out of date. So I'm going to be sticking to a 15-minute interval on most of the videos and doing a couple more part 1, part 2s so we can explain them a little bit more, have a little bit more real estate, not feel so rushed, but also not lose videos when they crash on my crappy software. You know, this thing deserves to just have an absolutely killer glow up and just, you know, shine like the brightness of the sun. That's what we're working on, you know. You guys have a wonderful afternoon, and tune in and fill us in on what you think we should be doing here. I know that you guys have an opinion as valid as mine. So go ahead and let me know what you think, and we will see you guys in 1 week.